You're lucky I didn't use that step. Let's see. Let's see. I want to start with three things: a law, a popular song, and a bit of history. And I'm going to begin the sermon by reciting the law. It's a law that's been amended many times, and this version is from 1972, though it's actually been revised in 1996. And actually, until yesterday, I'd never read either version. I don't think I'd ever actually even heard it. But some of you out there may know this law by heart. If you do, I invite you to stand and repeat it with me. I will do my best to be honest, to be fair, to help where I am needed, to be cheerful, to be friendly and considerate, to be a sister to every Girl Scout, to respect authority, to use resources wisely, to protect and improve the world around me, to show respect for myself and others through my words and actions. Come into this space of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Well, many of you may have figured that out. Those were the words of the 1972 version of the Girl Scout law from Girl Scouts in the USA. And interestingly enough, Girl Scouts has declared 2012 to be the year of the girl. And maybe, I hope we can assist them in some way in their celebration this year. Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. Next, we have an old rock and roll song, and I'm not going to sing. You'll all thank me afterwards during the potluck, I'm sure. Well, you walk into a restaurant strung out from the road, and you feel the eyes upon you as you're shaking off the cold. You pretend it doesn't bother you, but you just want to explode. Most times you can't hear them talk. Other times you can. All the same old cliches, is that a woman or a man? And you always seem outnumbered. You don't dare make a stand. Here I am on the road again. Here I am up on the stage. Here I go playing star again. There I go. Turn the page. Yep, I bet you wondered if I'd ever used Bob Seger in a sermon. Well, there we go. He wrote that one night, apparently in 1972, after being at a truck stop diner near Omaha. And it's got interesting things in it. It's got whispers and condemnation, warnings. Maybe there's even some violence that might be attached to it. He didn't know what would happen. He didn't know if he was safe. Come into this place of peace. What is it like to endure the whispers of locals? And you always seem outnumbered. You don't dare make a stand. What's it like to always seem outnumbered? Let the silence heal your spirit. What does it feel like for you here in this congregation? I hope it feels safe. I hope it always feels safe to be in Girl Scouts, where they say, to show respect for myself and others through my words and actions. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. So the third thing I promised you was a bit of history. And I decided to include the voice of Sojourner Truth in our service to point out how common some assumptions are. Now, there's no exact transcript of her 1851 speech to the Second Ohio Women's Convention, and it was more than a decade later before the organization's president, Frances Dana Barker Gage, wrote a recollection of the speech. Gage wrote that many in the women's rights movement were afraid of having a black woman speak. They wanted Gage to control the conversation. They wanted it to stay on target. The message of suffrage was actually a white, middle-class, liberal, not radical message. The leaders of the movement feared that the press would combine suffrage and abolition in the public mind, stirring up fear and hatred because abolition was not popular in Ohio or much of anywhere in the country. But Gage didn't listen to them. She didn't listen to those who might have silenced Sojourner Truth. Interestingly, at the time, the Universalist Church had turned very conservative. They weren't abolitionists. Well, there were a few, but mostly they weren't abolitionists. And they were almost as conservative as the Unitarians were at that time. The Universalist Church, indeed, wasn't a safe space if you were an abolitionist or a suffragist. Now, I've been talking about the newsiness of Sojourner Truth's words. It's like commenting on a politician's clothing, the color of their suit or dress, instead of the content of their speech. It's a marvelous technique that the news channels have learned very well. If you want to silence minority voices, talk about peripheral issues rather than quoting the words of those who have spoken. But what Sojourner Truth was saying was amazing. She said that her experience as a woman differed in almost every way from the experience of the other women. Sojourner spoke her truth. She said that the right to work wasn't an issue for her. She'd worked plenty. And then she linked two oppressions, the lack of women's rights and slavery. And she asserted that liberation did not depend on intelligence, didn't depend on becoming like the dominant culture, but qualifying for freedom should be applied as a matter of fairness. And finally, she turned the masculine story of Jesus into a feminist story of Mary and God. She completely reframed their religious argument. To put it mildly, wow. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. I think we're ready to talk about the girl. Not the year of the girl, though Girl Scouts in the United States of America may find that this is what the year of the girl ends up being about. I want to talk about a particular girl named Bobby Montoya. How many of you know that name? Just a couple. Bobby lives in Colorado, and she wanted to join the Girl Scouts back in October. CNN reports, a troop leader initially told Bobby's mother that Bobby couldn't join the troop because Bobby had boy parts. even though Bobby identifies as a girl, has since the age of 2. And it turns out that this exclusion was in violation of Girl Scout policy. The local leader didn't know, but on appeal, the state organization said that Bobby was welcome to join Girl Scouts because, and I quote, if a child identifies as a girl and the child's family presents her as a girl, Girl Scouts of Colorado welcomes her as a Girl Scout. Very nice. As the Girl Scout law says, I will do my best to show respect for myself and others through my words and actions. The Girl Scouts of Colorado are living out their principles. And this leads to the challenge for the today: fish. Or more accurately, allies. Don't worry, everybody's confused. Ally is a word that we use in social justice work. And I hope you looked at Leo Leone's fantastic artwork in Fish is Fish. And as you remember, Minnow and Tadpole were friends. The tadpole grew into a frog and left to see the world, and Minnow grew to be an adult fish. When the now adult frog came back, Fish wanted to understand what the world was like above water. But when the frog described cows or birds or people, Fish could only imagine them as variations of fish. I didn't read the book to the end for the children because it gets a bit scary after that marvelous illustration. Fish wants to experience Frog's world so much that he jumps out of the water and lands on the grassy bank. And there he lies gasping for oxygen. But fortunately, Fish finds him and pushes him back into the pond. And only then, Fish is able to see the beauty of his own world and that fish is fish. So I want to use the analogy of the pond as a stand-in for dominant culture. Dominant culture is the assumption that is made about a person when you don't know anything about the person. Now, personal identity has a lot of different facets. Sometimes you're the fish, sometimes you're the frog. If you're a part of the dominant culture, you're in the pond with everybody else. I was up in Boston this past week, and we had an interesting conversation because first year ministers all came from around the country. And I mentioned how when I was in Louisiana, the assumption was that I was Catholic because everybody was Catholic. And one of the other ones said that they were in Iowa, I think, where being Catholic was actually something that was unusual, and people questioned you if you said that you were Catholic because you were so strange. Sometimes you're in the pond. Sometimes you've left to go on the land. But if you're a minority and you have developed your own culture within society that's separate from society, then you end up developing what's called a dual consciousness. It's like the frog. You might be permitted to swim in the pond with the fishes, but you can also retreat to the land and see the world from a different angle. Sojourner Truth had a completely different experience of being a woman, one that the white women of Ohio couldn't understand. And Bob Seger, the long-haired rock musician, lived a life that the truck drivers couldn't imagine either. And who can blame the Scout leader? So many of us live in a dominant, transphobic pond called the United States of America. It's a very deep pond, and it echoes endlessly with messages of exclusion. What if we are a congregation where all the members are married couples, but we want to invite single adults as well? Okay, can we imagine how to make the place more welcoming? Maybe we put in more microwave ovens because single people always eat microwaved food. Or we put in a whole section that's just one chair wide because single people always sit by themselves. Now, think of us as the fish. And the single people, or actually there's a lot of different types of non-coupled peoples. So we shouldn't insist that they all live under the same label. But they're the frogs and other amphibians. Society is designed to advantage couples, and we can't really imagine the world of an uncoupled person. In real life, that may be one of the reasons why when one member of a couple dies, the other one just sort of fades away sometimes. That's why a community like ours is so important, to keep people, let them adjust, hold them after a spouse has died. Now, how about if you said, well, one of my best friends is single. I know what they need. We can't generalize or even trust what your friend has told you, because the images that you conjure up in your head about single life are all as phony as fish. That's where being an ally comes in. Remember that line? You always seem outnumbered, so you don't dare make a stand. What if Bob Seger had had an ally amongst the truck drivers? Someone who stood up to his whispering friends and said, "Friends, your words sadden me. I know that hair length doesn't determine someone's gender identity, but I see you insulting these travelers. I wish you would stop." What if an ally made a stand against the bullies? On the downside, without this hit song, maybe Bob Seger's music career would have actually sort of taken a nosedive, and then Metallica wouldn't have done a cover of the song, and all of rock and roll history would have changed just from that one act. To be an ally is to remember that you're a fish. To remember that you can't know what it's like. You can't know. You can't get out of the pond. But it means that you're going to live your life based on values rather than on tribal identity. It's to develop a certain level of cultural humility, curiosity, and listening skills, and also to learn to be an advocate rather than a leader. The concept of being an ally comes in the Standing on the Side of Love campaign. That's a movement in our denomination to engage in social witness and social action with marginalized communities rather than for marginalized communities. Get that distinction? With instead of for. The goal is not to dream up what those communities need, nor is it to provide them leadership. Instead, it's to listen to what the groups believe is needed and to work with them towards that goal or those goals. So showing up to an LGBT rights rally or a vigil against capital punishment or against bullying or forced deportations, speaking out for access to education, access to medical care, access to peace. This can be very frustrating for members of a dominant culture because they tend to dominate, to be humble, to ask, to suspend judgment may not be a natural reaction. But it is needed for transformation, to grow into beloved community. We cannot depend on members of marginalized communities to speak as boldly as Sojourner Truth, not when our culture keeps on repeating sad cliches. So it's our role as allies to interrupt the echo chamber. Come into this place of peace and let its silence heal your spirit. May we learn how to share serenity and peace, welcoming all kindred spirits. Come into this place of memory and let its history warm your soul. May we see our history, impacts of our dominance, hear all the memories, forgive, learn, and grow. Come into this place of prophecy and power and let its vision change your heart. Prophecy, they say, comes from the margins of society. Humility and listening calls each of us to grow. And then one day we will meet, seeing that which binds us together more than that which separates us. He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. Amen. Our closing song is a round, I believe, number 1059. That's it.